Hello, thank you for joining me today. My name is Pam LaFountain and I am an art educator with the Newport Library Art Center. Today, we're going to be learning to backstitch for outlining, making lines, and writing. This is the third part of the series on cross-stitching. So, if you have not watched part 1 and part 2, please do so now, as I will refer to things discussed in those videos. Part 1 also explains the materials needed and where you can find them. Backstitching is just what it sounds like, stitching a line, but going backwards to make each stitch. Much easier than it sounds. So I'm going to show you, this is an example that has all 3 backstitchings in it. So first of all, you can use backstitching to do the outline around this lighthouse. Right? You can also use backstitching to make lines in your project, like that, and even the tree branches. And you can also write with backstitching. So that's what we're going to do today. So first you want to take your graph paper and you want to just get a little piece of it. And so this is, I just kind of drew a sample line, and you can draw any line or you can do one like this on your graph paper. But what you want to try to do is make sure that you have at least some diagonal in there. We'll practice that. And if you could also have part of your line have at least 3, maybe 4 stitches, and you want to go for a total of about 8 or 9 stitches. So you can pause the video right now and either design your own line, or you can copy this one. Okay, so to begin backstitching, you're going to want to take your thread. So I'm going to just put my pattern here and we'll kind of refer back to it. So I'm going to start, I could start any place because I'm just practicing. So I'm going to start right about here. Okay. So I just brought my thread up there. Now I'm going to be going this way. So on the back, I want to keep my thread in that direction. Right? Remember, I'm going to have a little tail like that. All right, so I want my tail to kind of go in the direction I'm going to be sewing. So that's my first stitch. Now, really what I'm doing is starting where the star is. Okay, so my first stitch is really going to go back to the right. So I'm going to go back to the right like that. Okay, so like that. And I'm keeping my thread. So I want to kind of take my thread now, because I'm going to be doing those diagonals. I want to have my thread go up a little bit, because what I'm going to try to do, just like your cross stitch, is I'm going to try to catch that thread. So my next stitch will be, okay, so my next stitch is there. I'm going to go in the diagonal, and then I can pull it through and go back down where I was before. Okay, and I can turn it around, and I'm going to try to catch that thread. Now, if I keep that thread in the direction I'm going, probably eventually I will get it. Right, so let's do a second stitch, a second diagonal. Okay, so there's my second diagonal. Okay, now we're going to do one stitch. I'm going to kind of keep an eye, because this would be a great time to catch my thread. So I'm going to keep that there, my needle up there, bring it through like that. All right, now if you look at the next thing on our pattern, it's 4 stitches in a row. So you could do 4 stitches in a row if you wanted to. You can also do what's called a long stitch, which is a form of backstitching, and that is to go down 4. So go down 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. And bring your needle up there and do all 4 stitches. So that's kind of like a long backstitch. Right? And then we have one more stitch going this way. Okay, so now we have the same as this pattern right there. All right, so that's just some sampling. Now, in order to tie off your thread, you want to turn it over and now normally you'd have some other stitches here so you could kind of help, but what we want to do is we're going to kind of take our needle and go back through some of that stitching. Okay, and sometimes you can even kind of make a little, like I went through, and then I'm going to loop it around and go through the same stitches again. It kind of ties it off a little bit. Maybe one more time to get it like that. So I've just kind of knotted it up. Now I'm ready to just cut off that little piece. Okay, so there you have your cross stitch. Now you can do writing exactly the same way. So if I have a piece of like this, these are numbers. When you're going to be doing some writing, you want to definitely use graph paper and kind of sketch out your words first. You can go onto Google and find all kinds of free fonts for cross stitch. All you need to do is Google craft stitch or cross stitch fonts, and there's all kinds of things. There's cursive, there's printed, there's kind of some fun ones. So all kinds of different fonts that you can use, but please, you really want to set it up on graph paper first, especially when you get to your project. So we'll talk about that. So one last thing that I want to talk about is just simply, so how many threads do you decide to use? So here's a couple of things that I can show you. So on this side of the apple, I used 2 threads, okay, kind of like I just did with that last one. Over here, I used just 1 thread. So you can see that it's a lot thinner, right? Normally, when I'm using 14 count, I'll use 1 string thread. And when I'm using 11, I'll use 2. But it really is, your personal preference. Sometimes you have to experiment a little bit with your backstitching to get the one that you want. Now, when you're outlining, you can outline right along the corners, just like that, or you can go through diagonals. Right? And if you get here and you say, I don't really like that white right there, you can do what's called a quarter stitch, which is with my red, I would start in this hole right here. So I could, let me just get up. I could start in this little hole right here, and I would come up through there with my needle, like this, right there. And I could put it up there, and then I could take my needle, now I would be using red, and just go down through the center. Kind of like we did the half stitch in the last video. So you would do that with red if you wanted to kind of clean that out. But really, backstitching is very easy, and you can kind of practice with it. But my strong suggestion is to please be sure to sketch it all out on graph paper first. Okay, unless you're following a pattern, and then it's all done for you. So the next video will be showing you how to do French knots. And they're a little tricky, but once you get the hang of it, it works out well. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you again.